guys, it's Andy here, and welcome back to another episode of Deck Doctor. This is a blue steel deck submitted by one Feletrocia, and I absolutely love this deck. I reckon it's great. It's not exactly a new thing or like a new concept. It's something that was popularized a couple of years ago, actually, after the release of Kaladesh and Dominaria. Saw a few cards come into the deck that really made the deck tick. So I'm just going to touch over the main deck here, talk about the sideboard, and then go on to my improved version of the deck. When they submitted it originally, they did say that they're okay with the deck. They're happy for me to change it, but they're okay with the deck at the moment. The sideboard was really where they wanted some help. But with the release of Urza from Modern Horizons, there's a new direction that I wanted to see whether or not I could take the deck in, and I was pleasantly surprised with it. I reckon it works really, really well, and I can't wait to show you that version of the deck after this. So hopefully you guys enjoy the video. Start off the lineup, Feli's running 4 copies of Lodestone Golem. For 4, it's a 5/3 Golem with non-artifact spells, cost 1 more to cast. Adding attacks to our opponent, because preferably we're going to be the one playing the most artifact spells. 4 copies of Grand Architect, which is for 3, a 1/3 Vedalken Artificer. Other blue creatures you control get +1/+1, and then you can pay 1 blue to have target artifact creature become blue until end of turn. Tap it on tap blue creature you control to add 2 generic to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. 4 copies of Ethereum Sculptor and 4 copies of Chief Engineer, which is also a ramp in the deck. So Ethereum is for 2, a 1/2 that makes artifacts cost 1 less to play, and the Chief Engineer is for 2 or 1/3, a Vedalken Artificer that has artifact spells you cast have Convoke. So you can use your creatures as another mana source if you want to, which is really, really cool. 4 copies of Artificer's Assistant. For 1 blue, it's a 1/1 bird with flying, and whenever you cast a historic spell, you scry 1, with artifacts, legendaries, and sagas being historic. It's being able to filter off the top, really, really useful. 4 copies of Mausoleum Wanderer, which is for 1 blue, it's a 1/1 spirit with flying. Whenever another spirit enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and it also has Sacrifice it to counter target instant or sorcery spell unless this controller pays X, where X is its power. It's very often just going to be a little bit of a tax on our opponent that could catch them off guard in the early to mid game. But it's also an evasive threat that can just chip in for a little bit of damage. A single copy of Wormcoil Engine, which is for 6, a 6/6 artifact creature worm with Death Touch and Lifelink, and then when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you get 2 3/3 worm tokens. One of them having Death Touch and the other one having Lifelink. It's an absolute bomb in this deck, I love it. 2 copies of Throne of the God Pharaoh, which is a janky piece that I actually really like in this. So it's for 2, it's a legendary artifact that sits on the battlefield, and at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. And with most of our creatures being able to tap to the Grand Architect's ability, this could be chipping in for quite a lot of damage at the end of the turn, which could be really important. 3 copies of Khan the Great Creator, a great card to come out of War of the Spark. For 4, it's a 5 loyalty planeswalker. Activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated. His +1 ability is until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. And his -2 ability is you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal it, and then put it into your hand, which can turn our sideboard into more of a toolbox, and we can get some serious value out of it. Really, really good card for the deck. 4 copies of Smuggler's Copter, which is for 2, a 3/3 vehicle with flying. Whenever Smuggler's Copter attacks or blocks, you may draw a card. If you do, you discard a card, and it's got crew 1. So it's not a creature until you crew it, but when you do, you tap any number of creatures you control to total power of 1 or more, and then this becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So vehicles by themselves can't attack. You tap any one of the creatures that are in the deck to it, it's going to be able to swing in, and then you're going to be able to chip in for 3 or more flying damage, depending on the situation, and be able to loot as well. I really like Smuggler's Copter in this deck. I reckon it's a great artifact for it. And 4 copies of Walking Ballista, which is for 2X. It's a 0/0 artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, you get X +1 counters on it. So for every 2 you pay, you get 1 counter. And then it has pay 4 to put a +1 counter on it. And then at instant speed, you can remove a +1 counter to deal 1 damage to target creature or player, which is another great finisher in the deck. It's also one of the only removal pieces that we have as well. Looking at the land base here, there's 12 copies of Snow-Covered Islands, 4 copies of Bleak Moth Nexus, which has tap, add 1 colorless, or you can pay 1. It becomes a 1/1 Blinkmoth artifact creature token with flying till end of turn. It's still a land. And then it's got pay 1, tap, target Blinkmoth gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Just another evasive threat that we can add to the field. 4 copies of Flooded Strand, which tap, pay 1 life, sacrifice it, and search your library for a plains or island. Being able to fetch those lands out and filter the deck are always a good thing. A single copy of Aboro Palace in the Clouds, which is a legendary land with tap, add 1 blue, and then it has pay 1 generic to return it to its owner's hand. And a single copy of Academy Ruins, which is another legendary land. It's got tap, add 1 generic, or pay 2, 1 and a blue, to tap and put target artifact card in your graveyard on top of your library. That is the main deck. Touching over the sideboard here, We can see here there's another copy of Wormcoil Engine in here. We have 2 copies of Thorn of Amethyst, which is for 2. It's an artifact with non-creature spells cost 2 more to play. Fairly good for us because we are so creature heavy. It's also really good against the control matchups. 2 copies of Dismember, which is for 1 and 2 Phyrexian Black. At instant speed, target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. 2 copies of Karn, leaning heavily towards the artifact synergies in the deck. For 4, it's a 5 loyalty planeswalker with his +1 ability being reveal the top 2 cards of your library. An opponent chooses one of them, you put the card into your hand and exile the other with the silver counter on it. His -1 ability is you put a card you own with a silver counter on it from exile into your hand, and his -2 ability is you create a 0/0 construct, which is the 0/0 artifact creature token that gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Really, really cool in this. It just makes this massive bomb threat repetitively, which can be really great depending on your matchup. A single copy of Mycosynth Lattice, which is for 6. It's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and it gives all permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. All cards that aren't in play, spells and permanents, are colorless, and players may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. So the obvious synergy is between this and Karn the Great Creator. Making all permanents artifacts means that our opponent is going to be able to activate any activated abilities of those artifacts. For example, lands, being able to tap for mana. Now they're artifacts, they can't tap for mana. Really, really cool. Great way to shut your opponent down. A lot of people have been building around it, and it's definitely one of the more control-y and more arsehole-y ways to lock out a game, which can be really useful depending on the matchup. A single copy of Damping Sphere for the Storm or Tron matchups. For 2, it's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and if a land would tap for 2 or more mana, it produces 1 generic instead. And each spell a player casts costs 1 more for each other spell that player casts this turn. Absolutely hoses Storm, hoses a lot of aggro decks that try to keep playing creatures again and again. Just absolutely hosing Storm and Tron decks. Really, really cool. Torpor Orb in here, depending on the matchups. For 2, it's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. A single copy of Relic of Progenitus with pay 1. It's an artifact that sits on the battlefield. Tap, target player removes a card in his or her graveyard from the game, or you can pay 1 to remove it from the game, and then remove all graveyards from the game and draw a card, which is, again, really useful in the graveyard matchups. Single copy of Basilisk's Collar, which is an equipment for 1. Equipped creature has Death Touch and Lifelink, and equipped for 2. So we can play this, put this on a Walking Ballista, and now every time we ping for 1 damage, it's just dead. Doesn't matter how big it is. Giving it Death Touch can be really cool. Just another really toolboxy style card to come out of the sideboard into the main deck through Karn the Great Creator's ability, which can be really fun. Single copy of Ceremonious Rejection, which is for 1 blue at instant speed. You can target colorless spell. Really good in the Eldrazi or artifact matchups. Another piece of graveyard hate in the form of Graft Digger's Cage, which is for 1. It's an artifact that sits on the battlefield. Creature cards can't enter the battlefield from graveyards or libraries, and players can't cast cards in graveyards or libraries. And a single copy of Pithing Needle to finish off the sideboard here. So Pithing Needle is for 1. Again, it's an artifact. As Pithing Needle enters the battlefield, you name a card. Activated abilities of the source of the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities, which absolutely hoses Planewalkers, or it could shut down useful creatures in the format. Just a really, really good card. But that is the sideboard, and that is the main board of the first version of the deck. Looking back at the deck, I was pretty happy with how the deck looked. I was really happy with the sideboard. I'm not sure what I was going to be doing to fix or improve that. I reckon the deck looks sweet as it is. But going forward, with the addition of some new cards, trying to tweak what the main deck is and what it's trying to do, and then hopefully try to improve on the sideboard. Let's see what As you can see, we've got most of the original deck still here. I've just added some new toys to the deck. With those come new synergies, so a couple of other cards have been added to the mix, and the sideboard looks pretty much the same, but I've added in a few new toys to that as well, and definitely tweaked the numbers on that one. So, touching over the main deck here, we still have the 4 copies of Artificer's Assistant, the 4 copies of Chief Engineer, the Ethereum Sculptors, the Grand Architects. Those don't change. The big change here is 4 copies of Urza Lord High Artificer. For 4, 2 and 2 blue, it's a 1/4 legendary creature human artificer. When it enters the battlefield, you get a construct. So it's a 0/0 artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. All your artifacts gain tap and untapped artifact you control to add 1 blue mana, and pay 5 to shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until in a turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. So if we have the mana, which because of Urza's ability and because of the Grand Architect's ability, we can just keep siphoning off the top of our deck, being able to dig through the deck for the combos, off his pay 5 ability, or we can just filter the mana through other sources. So Walking Ballistas still in the deck, in a 4 of, great mana sink, 4 copies of Arcbound Ravager. I'm not sure if budget was a big issue from the original list, but the Ravager I'll explain in a second. The relevance in this version of the list is the +1 counter synergies. That's why he's in here. So for 2, it's a 0/0 artifact creature beast. with sacrifice an artifact to put a +1 counter on it, and it also has modular 1. So we swing in the stuff that gets blocked. If it's artifacts, we can sacrifice that, throw the counters onto Ravager, do whatever else. But the modular bit means that we can, if he dies, all the counters that are on him goes on to the next thing that we want to put it onto. So we can use them as kind of a sack outlet to chew up all of our artifacts that we're not using, put all the counters onto this, and then sacrifice him to himself and put the counters on Walking Ballista. It's just another way that we can pump that up. He can swing in for a lot of damage by himself, which is really good. But the awesome synergy in the deck, I'll explain in just a second. So we have 3 copies of the Khan Great Creator stayed in the deck. The 2 copies of Throne of the God Pharaoh stayed in the deck. And then the last few cards that I want to mention here is where we get some kind of weird synergies in the deck. So we have Metallic Mimic in a 2-of. For 2, it's a 2/1. It's an artifact creature shapeshifter. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen creature type in addition to its other types, and then each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So what's going to happen is you can aim Artificer if you want to have your Artificers come in with +1 counters on them. But if this comes in and we name Servo, that's when the synergy with Urza really breaks this card. So Animation Module, which we're running in a 3-of, is for 1, it's an artifact, and whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are placed on a permanent you control, you may pay 1. If you do, you create a 1/1 colorless Servo artifact creature token. So what's going to happen is we are going to need another way to put a +1 counter on a creature, so that's where the Ravager and the Walking Ballista come in. If they come in, they've got a counter on them. When the +1 counter trigger happens, we pay the 1, creating a 1/1 servo. Because it's a servo, it's going to come in with a +1 counter on it, and then we can tap that servo to Urza's ability, generating the mana and paying for the next servo. By the end of it, we have a seemingly infinite number or an infinite number of servos that are all 2/2s. They're all sideways, and if that's not good enough for you, pass the turn. If we got thrown out, they're just dead. On the next turn, if they haven't swept the board, we have an infinite number of creatures to attack with. And if that's not good enough for you, we can sacrifice all of them to the Ravager. If we got the Walking Ballista out, it's infinite damage onto that. If we sacrifice the Ravager and put all the counters from the modular ability on him onto the Blinkmoth Nexus and swing in with an infinitely large flyer. There's so many intricacies in this deck that it's like playing a Rubik's Cube, but if it all comes together, holy shit is this deck fun. I've had a hell of a lot of fun playing this one. Looking at the rest of the land base here, we've got the 4 copies of Flooded Strand still in the deck. I have gone down 2 copies of Snow-Covered Islands to put in 2 copies of Buried Ruin, which is a land with tap, add 1 generic, and pay 2 to tap and sack it to return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, as opposed to the on top of the graveyard that was in the Academy Ruins. I felt like being able to play something out, have it answered, and then us immediately be able to get that thing back in the same turn was too valuable not to at least have a little bit of it in the deck. So Buried Ruin was definitely something that I felt needed to be in there. Kept in the Academy Ruins is still a really good card, and it's recurable, which is great. And the Palace in the Clouds is also something that ended up staying in the deck, although I'm still not sure of the function completely. So touching on the sideboard here, so you can see here, I still have a lot of the same cards for the sideboard. We're still running Relic, we're still running the Pithing Needle, we're still running the Damping Sphere, the Amethysts are still in there in a 2-of. The Lattice I've actually bumped up to a 2-of, as well as the Wormcoil, both in 2-ofs. And the reason I've done that is because if they can just answer it the first time we try to play it, the backup plan is being able to play it again and hopefully catch them off guard. So just adding that bit of redundancy from the sideboard to the main deck, which I felt was really important. Kept the 2 copies of Khan Scion, really good, especially with the Urza, being able to create even more constructs with the deck. Always going to be a good thing. The 2 copies of Dismember, I thought this card was too good to take out. Definitely good in the sideboard. Great piece of removal. One thing I have added in is the single copy of Ensnaring Bridge, which is for 3. It's an artifact that sits on the battlefield. Creatures with power greater than the number of cards in your hand can't attack. So we want to be trying to play out our hand fairly often. There's not a lot of reactive stuff that we can do in this deck. We're not really doing stuff at instant speed unless it's already on the battlefield. We're not playing cards with flash. We're not doing all that kind of stuff. So all of our stuff is happening on board. So we don't really care if we have an empty hand. We're trying to achieve that. So if our hand is empty, we still have alternate win cons. We're trying to grind through the deck. We're trying to get the Walking Ballista tokens. We're trying to kill them with God Pharaoh. We have those alternate win cons that the aggro decks might just not have. So this could really give us a great advantage against those kind of matchups. And to finish off the sideboard here, a single copy of Chalice of the Void, which is for 2x. It's an artifact that sits on the battlefield, and Chalice of the Void enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. So like Walking Ballista, for every 2 you pay, you're going to have 1. And whenever a player casts a spell with converted cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, you counter that spell. So this is very much reliant on the matchup. But what I had in mind when putting this in there was when they're playing 0 cost stuff, but going up against other artifact decks that will be running stuff like Moxes or other 0 cost artifacts, And then you've got decks like Living End that run the suspend cards that they play for free. This is just going to be able to catch those cards, and it's also adding an artifact to the board for us to be able to ramp harder with the Urza as well. So it's not a huge amount of synergy. You could probably swap this back out for the Basilisk Collar, but I thought the Chalice definitely did add something to the sideboard from here. But that is the sideboard, and that is the main board, and that is my quote-unquote improved version of Blue Steel. Feletrocia, let me know in the comments if you liked the deck, didn't like the deck, agreed or disagreed with the cards. If anybody else has a deck that they want to submit to the Deck Doctor series, just post it in the comments below, along with what you want the deck to do if it's not doing it, or the direction that you're trying to take the deck into and you need a hand with it. Let me know in the comments and I'll add it to my ever-growing list of deck submissions for the Deck Doctor series. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to see new videos as they were released. If you like what I do and you want to support the channel, you can throw me $1 on my Patreon at patreon.com/SandersQuest. And I will see you guys in the next video. Keep questing, guys.